Good. So, Brandon, you sort of segued from the previous question to my next question, which is what have you learned academically that you can or will apply to your vocation? You've sort of touched on that. So, if you want to sort of elaborate or expound on that.
Okay, I would say, like, for instance, with Intro to Biblical Studies, just learning, the different understandings of, how the Bible was written, the geographic nature of things, the different stories, and putting things together. But also, y'all, when we get these stories, when we get these miracles we read about with Peter walking on water, being able to ask just logical questions in seminary. And so, like, things like that, and being able to get answers as well, but then also getting answers and then getting opinions. And so it makes it to a rich process. For instance, with leadership and development, the different readings challenging me to really just go forth. And so, like, for instance, I've been, let's just take, for instance, Robert DiAngelo's White Frugality, prevalent to right now. White Frugality, prevalent. And we went through that in seminary. And so, like, these different books, it has, like, just allowed me to be able to go forth, in a way to where, like, yeah, to be able to help. And everything has really just challenged me to, go forth, to make change. And so I don't want to elaborate too much. I'll let Alexis and Alexis.
IBS has taught me structure and themes and paying attention to the words of the text. With that learning, it has assisted in my preaching in the way that I develop a sermon now. Prophetic preaching has taught me to, and I'm still in that class right now, but it has taught me just different ways to present the text in terms of preaching that is powerful and impactful, and you don't sound like, ramble and rant. LAD and PIF, I'm kind of with Kenneth on that. They open my eyes to the world of Christianity. So academically, I have learned that it is not, I think we read some article that was like, the North, we talked about the North and the South or something like that, but understanding the world of Christianity globally that I just never considered. And I actually used that today in a conversation I had to have with my behavioral team in terms of black and white. Like, you all are white, this is your place. Same way as, as Christians in America, we only see Christians in America, and we don't think about Christians in America anywhere else. So if I go over to Africa, I'm a Christian in America, it's a whole nother it's a different space. So I can't negate what they know and what they love and what they learn, but I can impart and enjoy. So academically, it has been very informative, very resourceful, and has allowed me to take those resources that I've learned in that class, and as Brandon would say, go forth, but be able to answer the call, whatever that call is in that moment. Kenneth.
Hey. So advanced writing, I've been in several writing classes and learned a lot about style and structure and sentence structure and a lot of things like that. I think the writing class taught me about writing extemporaneously, being instant and sticking to your thought and coming to a conclusion, different parts of it was an affirmation of things that I already knew, but it made me a little bit more, it made me more academically sound in wanting to write progressively faster. And then PIF, eye-opening with respect to the Eucharist and just how it got started, where it came from, baptism, how unbalanced it is, how unfair it is, how things are not applied universally. And it made me look at my own theology. Aside from having to write it, I was able to go back and examine where my theological origins came from out of spiritual churches in this country, and how it really was a women's movement. Things like that really forced me to grow, forced my hand. I got to social justice or sexual violence that Brandon's talking about. I learned the importance of listening. And somebody who's going through victimization, it is how you listen and write down what you hear. And if you're going to counsel, be sure you heard everything and be very, very careful even before you offer a thought or opinion, because you may not be the person that person needs to hear. It might be another service, or it might be another, avenue that they need to address their hurt or their pain or the violence. Maybe they need counseling. Maybe they need legal advice. Maybe you can't do it all. Maybe whatever that session that they spilled their story on is not necessarily the last session. It might be more than that. But to listen quietly and understand the hurt and the pain, and to see the court. We had to go to court, Brandon. We had to go to court. I mean, that was crazy.
And to see that scenario that happened there.
I mean, justice is crazy, and guys get away scot-free. Beat your woman, go to court, get off, go back and beat your woman again. I was like, what? Every court, the courses just give you some association with something about life. So this social justice piece that I took with Dr. Crumpton, and, that really kind of made me open my eyes about how my ministry fits into my community and fits into various areas of social justice or social services or education or wherever it is. We had to do an asset map in that class and show how your ministry tied into the assets of the community. So I learned a lot out of that, and some of the readings and lectures that we had, a lot of that. And of course, LAD, not done. I have to take Intro to Biblical Studies, so I'm gonna call y'all and try to, see where I need to go. But yeah, I'm still learning. That's what I got.
And I just want to add in, y'all, like you guys said, Ken and Alexis, like everything literally from each class I've taken, when you mention like the baptism and the Eucharist and different things, I've taken that back to my ministry, and I've been able to see the cracks or the things that we are not doing correctly, and then be able to apply that to our ministry. And so like everything literally from every class, I've been trying to take it back to our ministry and our community. And with every professor, I've been seeing cracks of things that we're not doing and opportunities that we can do things better. And so seminary has totally done that for me thus far.
So my calling is to lead people to life. I think all of us read that book, When We Die, Nobody Cry. And in that book, Raymond talks about his vocation or his calling is his call to self protection or personality. It's personal survival. Yes, personal survival. But I personally believe my vocation is not surviving myself, surviving others, lead other people to life, because Jesus was not trying to survive himself, he will try to save others. I talked with my mentor in Sri Lanka and what I'm going to do in my higher studies or my ministerial life, because I feel now I'm a little bit too much far from my church, because I am a person who works with church. I talk with my mentor, and because my church leadership asked me what I'm going to do in future, because I do not want to settle in here. First thing, I want to go back and work with my people. And then I talk with my people and I told my faith is lead my oppressive people, lead my poor people, and give them liberation from the unjust structures in Sri Lanka. I talk with them and I asked, after my master studies, I want to come back to Sri Lanka. And then I want to go to a rural congregation and work again. It's when we compare to personally, it's really difficult. Personally, because when we compare the benefits, it's really difficult. Because, in Sri Lanka, as a pastor, we only get $150 per month. If I going to see the salary and benefits, my calling is going down. But my first priority is my calling, lead my people into life. And not only that, then I asked my church to work. I want to work as a part-time lecturer. What I learn, I want to give to the students who are going to be ministers in future life. That's another thing, because most of the Sri Lankan ministers, they do not have this kind of opportunity to do studies in here. Another thing is, I would like to talk with my church and MacComic. If we have a chance, we can give an opportunity to students, those who are willing to return to Sri Lanka again, not settling here. Because I'm totally fed up and totally critical about the church leadership, because most of the educated leaders in Sri Lanka, not only Sri Lanka, India also, they're going for their higher studies in other countries. Then finally they are settled in that country. That church and that congregation are suffering, because for my studies, from my undergraduate studies, for my salaries, my church congregation spent money for me. But I used all the benefits from them, and then finally I went out and thinking about only myself, not the other people. That's why still Sri Lankan church and Sri Lankan people are in poverty and just structures, because nobody truly working for liberation or the oppressive people. Just they're working as a job or work. Because that's why this academic year I'll more learn about the suffering of the suffering of Black people, how they suffer in US context, how the white Christianity treat them, and also how the migrant people and how the American government handling the situations. Yes, then I apply to my vocation. As a person, I would like to be the people, those who are suffering, give a life to them, give some kind of energy to spend their life. But I don't know how it will going to be in future. But I in future I would like to do my best for those who are suffering under unjust structures, especially in political structures in Sri Lanka and poverty.
The most direct answer to your question, Brenda, is I do not know. I don't know at this point. But I certainly have gained a lot more clarity in this past year. Coming into seminary, I had a foot in the nonprofit world and also a foot in the Christian world. And it's becoming clear to me that I certainly want to continue with more of a foot in a Christian context than just this nonprofit context. That I'm just learning about how rich the Christian tradition is and how bold Christianity as a faith allows God's people to be. And I feel called specifically to be in community with other Christians, that we can hold one another accountable to those faith ideals and practices in ways that are needed certainly to be reclaimed, especially following a 2016 election in which Christian ideals were lifted up and celebrated. And most of the Christian voices the past decade that have been the loudest have been Christian voices that I just strongly disagree with, that I do not believe are in line with credible Christian values. And I'm talking political voices, of course, or how they enter the political sphere. And so I certainly feel called to be deeply engaged in a Christian community, even if doing nonprofit and ecumenical and interfaith type work and developing those coalitions and partnerships. I definitely want to be a part and in some way a leader of a Christian community that is trying to be radical in the ways it is reclaiming faith traditions and Christian practices. And to Dilshan's point, I certainly feel called to be some type of educator, to not hold on to the things which I'm learning, which are giving me life, which I find to be deeply life-giving and incredible, things that I have not known about my own faith that have come to light over the last year. And then alongside that, being an educator, being an innovative and creative empowerer, whatever that means, whether of local neighborhoods or of maybe larger, wider communities. But yeah, an educator of what I am hearing Christianity mean today in my own context and in the context for which I hope to find myself in. And then as I find myself in those contexts and being a part of a Christian community, making sure that we are using our practices and the ways that we are expressing our faith to empower our neighbor in ways that are making changes that are necessary and that are life-giving, both spiritually, faithfully, but also quite physically as well. And so that's where I am right now. I'm about to enter a field education placement too. And so I'm hoping that this next year gives me some clarity in that discernment and in that call. But I've been surprised. I thought I would leave seminary very comfortable to enter either this ordained world or the nonprofit world. But the more I think about when I feel most fully myself, it is certainly in a Christian context, holding and building partnerships and doing community with other Christians and based off of biblical messages. Just because I have found myself sometimes in nonprofit conversations that are not faith-based, but doing very faithful work, but are not necessarily faith-based. Sometimes I want to say the reason this is important to me is because this is what my faith calls me to do, and that is always not appropriate in those spaces. But I'm noticing that those are the times when I feel most fully myself, is when I'm able to claim I am not only advocating for these things, but I'm doing so particularly because I feel called as a Christian to do so. And so more spaces like that, where that is understood, that this is a church community or a practicing Christian community, is certainly a direction that I'm leaning more towards now than I thought I would entering seminary.
So in keeping up with the tradition, I think so far this evening, I'm going to probably say a couple of things that are going to be similar and some things that are going to be different. So to start off with what's probably similar is much like Blake, I do not have a direct answer to that question in terms of what I've learned thus far and how that is driving or how that will impact my vocation. And part of the reason why I don't know thus far is, quite frankly, and sometimes when you hear people say this, it sounds corny or canned, but it is truly the case in my experience. Trying to be as submissive as possible to the will of the Holy Spirit, I do not know where I'm being led. What I know is that the journey thus far has been amazing, right? And I'm trying to be very submissive and very, very willing, a willing participant in the course of the journey. Part of what I do know from a vocational perspective, if you will, is that I've always enjoyed teaching from the perspective of illumination and bringing light and leading people to not just the reality of a situation, but the truth of a thing, right? And so as it relates to that from a vocational perspective, even to teaching within the confines of the church as I do, and even outside of the church, I feel a passion to help people see the truth of the words of God, the reality of everyday life, and to marry those two concepts so they can work congruently, right? So, for example, using a little bit of what Blake spoke to, if we have these systems in place, these systems that cause people to be separate and definitely not equal, and we say that this is, but I'm a Christian, but it's separate and not equal, and it has nothing whatsoever to do with the attributes of Jesus Christ. Nothing whatsoever to do with the will of God. Nothing whatsoever to do with the plans that God has articulated clearly in his word for his people. I feel a passion to help people understand what God said versus what Dora said versus what you think. To marry those two together to help you see the light of, if we are to call ourselves children of the Most High God, if we are to call ourselves disciples of Christ, to actually be disciples of Christ. This is what his word says. This is what it means to live a faith-based life, not a perfect life, because he didn't call for us to be perfect. He called for us to be holy, but a life based on the word. This is what it really means. I know what you hear over there, what you see there, but this is what that means. I feel driven to help people understand the word of God and translate that to the will of God for what our lives are from a day-to-day basis. And unbeknownst to me, I felt that way for all my life. But in having the opportunity to teach, it comes out more because I'm passionate about being scripturally sound and really digging deeper into the scriptures and taking the scriptures like a microphone, not a microphone, but like a microscope to the actions of you, me, this person, that person, and really seeing, is this really what God said? Let me take a step back and let me look at myself. Is this really what he means? Am I in the dark? Do I want to be in the light? So from a vocational perspective, I don't know exactly what eventually that's going to lead to. I feel compelled to write. And since being in seminary, I've written more about the Word of God and how it relates to his people, created podcasts and content to try to speak to these things in a way that may be helpful to other people. So from a vocational perspective, one of the things that I know I see is being able to speak to people about the will and the word and the way of God and helping them to see how they fit in that spectrum and how it fits within their world, and that we all fall short of God's glory each and every day. But he's a merciful God. He is a compassionate God, one who would never leave us nor forsake us. And this is the way. Let me help you see it. So again, whether that translates to fully lecturing, speaking in front of people, or just being a minister full time, or finishing the books that I'm writing, I'm not exactly certain yet. So this is an exciting time as I'm learning as much as I am, and taking that and getting bolder in my prophetic witness, and getting bolder in my prophetic preaching, and how that is seeping over into every aspect of my life. And that wouldn't have happened if it were not for being in this seminary environment. So I found such a new boldness and such a new authenticity that, again, just from a vocational perspective, I know that I have to get a word out. I know that that word comes in books. I know that that word comes out in me being in front of people, speaking to them, but I don't yet know technically what that's going to look like. So that's the long and the short of it.